Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. Have you ever looked at someone and within 30 seconds thought, there is something deeply off about this person, but you couldn't explain why? Everything they said was charming. Everything they did looked generous. They smiled at all the right moments. They said all the right things. And yet something in your gut, something in that ancient biological alarm system buried deep in your nervous system, was quietly screaming that this person is not what they appear to be. And if that has ever happened to you, I want you to know that your gut was almost certainly right, because what you were detecting, without any psychological training, without any formal education, was the subtle, invisible signature of a narcissist. And today we are going to completely decode that signature. We are going to go so deep into the psychology and dark psychology of narcissism that by the end of this video, you will be able to spot one, understand one, protect yourself from one, and if you need to, escape one. Because narcissism is not just a personality quirk. It is not just someone being a little selfish or a little vain. It is a full psychological architecture designed, consciously or unconsciously, to consume the people around it. And once you understand how that architecture works, you will never be blindsided by it again. The first thing you need to understand is what narcissism actually is at its clinical core, because the internet has done something very dangerous to this word. It has turned it into a catch-all insult for anyone who is selfish or difficult, and that dilution of the term is actually one of the greatest gifts the true narcissist has ever received, because it means real narcissism hides in plain sight behind a wall of misunderstanding. So, let's be precise. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is a clinically recognized psychological condition characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance, a deep and insatiable need for admiration, a profound lack of empathy for others, and a hidden core of extreme psychological fragility that the narcissist spends every waking moment of their life defending and concealing. And that last part is the part most people never understand. Because when you look at a narcissist from the outside, you see someone who appears to have the biggest ego in the world. Someone who seems utterly invincible, completely self-sufficient, dripping with confidence. But what psychology tells us is happening underneath that performance is almost the exact opposite. Underneath the grandiosity is a self-image so fragile, so desperately insecure, that the narcissist needs a constant external supply of admiration, validation, and control just to function at a basic psychological level. And the moment that supply is threatened, the mask comes off, and what emerges is something much darker. Now let's talk about the mechanism that every narcissist uses, whether they know it or not, and it starts with something called love bombing. And if you have ever been in a relationship, a friendship, or even a professional dynamic with a narcissist, you will recognize this immediately, even if you never had a name for it. Love bombing is the narcissist's opening move. It is the phase where they make you feel like the most special, most understood, most seen human being who has ever walked the earth. They text you constantly. They remember every detail you mention. They tell you within weeks that you are their soulmate, their best friend, the person they've been waiting for their whole life. They make you feel chosen, elevated, almost addicted to their attention. And the reason this works is pure psychology, because the human brain releases dopamine in response to unpredictable rewards, and a narcissist in love bombing mode is a dopamine machine. They are flooding your brain's reward system with so much validation and attention that you become neurologically bonded to them before you have had any real opportunity to see who they actually are. And this is not an accident. This is the trap being set. Because once that bond is formed, once your brain is addicted to their validation, the narcissist has the leverage they need to begin the next phase. And that next phase is what psychologists call devaluation. And it begins so subtly that most people don't even realize it's happening until they are already deep inside it. The constant texts start to slow down. The warmth starts to cool. The person who once made you feel like the center of their universe starts making small comments that cut just slightly, starts canceling plans just often enough to create anxiety, starts withholding the validation they previously gave so freely. And what happens in your brain during this phase is deeply psychological, because your brain, now addicted to their approval, goes into a state of craving, And you begin doing something that the narcissist has been engineering from the beginning. You start working to get back to the love bombing phase. You start trying harder, being more accommodating, being more forgiving, shrinking yourself, apologizing for things that aren't your fault, because your brain has been conditioned to associate their approval with safety and their disapproval with danger. And this is the engine of narcissistic control. This push and pull between love bombing and devaluation. This psychological hot and cold that keeps you perpetually off balance, perpetually trying, perpetually focused on them and their moods. And from the outside, people ask, why don't you just leave? But from the inside, your nervous system has been rewired, and leaving feels psychologically impossible in a way that is very real and very documented in trauma research. Then there is gaslighting. And this is where the dark psychology of narcissism reaches its most sinister expression, because gaslighting is not just lying. Gaslighting is a sustained psychological campaign designed to make you doubt the accuracy of your own perception of reality. The narcissist says something cruel. You bring it up. They tell you it never happened. The narcissist does something manipulative. You confront it. They tell you you're too sensitive. You're misremembering. You're crazy. You come to them with evidence. They explain it away so convincingly that you start to wonder if maybe you are the problem. And over time, with enough repetition, gaslighting does something terrifying to the human mind. It erodes your trust in your own judgment. It makes you dependent on the gaslighter to tell you what is real and what isn't, which is precisely the psychological position the narcissist needs you to be in. Because a person who trusts their own perception is a person who might leave, and a person who has been gaslit into doubting their own mind is a person who stays and keeps providing the narcissistic supply the narcissist depends on to survive. Now let's talk about the different types of narcissists that psychology has identified, because they are not all the loud, obviously arrogant type you might be picturing. The grandiose narcissist is the one most people recognize, the one who dominates every room, who talks about themselves endlessly, who name drops, and brags and expects constant admiration. But the covert narcissist, also called the vulnerable narcissist, is far more dangerous because they are almost completely invisible. The covert narcissist presents as shy, self-deprecating, even victimized. They play the martyr. They collect injustices. They make you feel guilty for not giving them enough attention through quiet suffering rather than loud demands. They weaponize vulnerability itself. They use sensitivity as a blade. And because they don't fit the cultural image of a narcissist, they almost never get identified as one. And by the time people around them realize what's happening, they have already been thoroughly manipulated by someone who appeared to need their protection rather than threaten it. So what do you actually do? How do you protect yourself? Because awareness alone is not enough. You need strategies, and psychology gives us very clear ones. The first and most powerful is something called the gray rock method, which is exactly what it sounds like. You become as psychologically uninteresting as a gray rock to the narcissist. You give them nothing to react to, nothing to feed on, no emotional responses, no arguments, no tears, no visible hurt, because the narcissist's fuel is your reaction. Your emotion is their supply. And when you consistently deny them that fuel by responding to everything with flat, boring, emotionless neutrality, you become useless to them as a source of supply, and they will naturally redirect their energy elsewhere. This is not easy. It requires enormous psychological discipline, especially when your nervous system is screaming at you to react, but it is clinically the most effective tool for managing unavoidable contact with a narcissist. Whether that is a coworker, a family member, or an ex you share children with. And finally, the hardest truth about narcissism that psychology keeps telling us, and that most people still refuse to accept: narcissists do not change, not because they can't intellectually understand their behavior, but because the entire psychological structure of narcissism is built on the bedrock belief that everyone else is the problem, and they are not. Genuine change requires a level of self-reflection, a willingness to sit with psychological pain and take real accountability that the narcissistic defense system exists specifically to prevent. There are exceptions. There are people with narcissistic traits who, with intensive long-term therapy, do develop greater empathy and self-awareness. But they are the exceptions so rare that banking on it as your personal exit strategy from a narcissistic relationship is one of the most dangerous psychological bets you can make. Because the most important thing psychology tells us about narcissism is not how to fix the narcissist. It is how to protect yourself, how to recognize the pattern early, how to trust your gut when it tells you something is off, how to value your own perception of reality enough to defend it, and how to understand that leaving is not failure. Leaving is the moment you finally choose your own psychological survival over someone else's need to consume it. And if this video helped even one person recognize a dynamic they've been trapped in and didn't have words for, then this is exactly the kind of psychology that matters.